All right. So, guys, we got a really, really good group in here tonight. We want to first off just say thank you for joining us tonight. Thank you for sacrificing your time. We greatly appreciate it. We know that you guys are doing your mad dash to the finish here on your semester. So, hopefully, you're enjoying this nice weather that's coming across the country. Even here in Michigan, we're getting a little taste of it. Once again, we are going to be discussing tonight racism in STEM, foundation of understanding racism in STEM, and we have two wonderful presenters tonight, and they have great content for us. But just a little bit of housekeeping. Feel free when the time allows to take your phones off of mute or your devices off of mute, so you can ask your question. But what I'd like for you to do is, regardless if you come off of mute to ask your question tonight, let's please place all questions in the Q&A box tonight. What we're going to do, because we do expect a lot of engagement and questions around this topic, even if a question isn't answered tonight, we want to collect that question and make sure that an answer is provided via feedback after this session, or we may kickstart our next session with some feedback from the questions that were not answered tonight. So just wanted to make sure we got that out there today. Feel free to engage with us in the chat box. We'll be working with you there. And just a reminder, every question, if you ask it tonight or not, please place your question in the Q&A box. With that said, I'm going to hand it over to our wonderful guest, Dr. Williams. It's all yours.
Well, good evening. Can everyone hear me very good?
Awesome.
Okay, wonderful. So I am Johniqua Williams, and I am so excited to be here with you all. I'm with a good friend of mine, Dr. White, and we have put together a presentation for you just to talk a little bit about racism in STEM. We'll talk more about the series in just a moment, but I'm excited. I am here in Georgia where it is hotter than I don't know what today. We are experiencing great weather, and we're just excited to be here with you. I'll pass it to Dwayne before we get started.
Yes. As Dr. Williams said, I am so excited to be here in front of you all and to share this space with you all. I hope that you all are able to leave here with something today. We also come and share this space with you all as individuals who are life learners, right? And still learning in this process and becoming an anti-racist or against anything, right? So it's important for us to understand that dynamic. Like, it's a lifelong process, right? So we really approach this conversation with a degree of compassion as well as humility. So yes, please engage with us. We want to hear your voices, right? So yeah.
Awesome. So we're going to go ahead and get started. I want to explain one aspect before we move forward. This is a 3-part series. So we will be before you. Hopefully Dwayne will be able to join us for the last piece, but I will be before you each time. So the first one tonight is just the foundations of racism in STEM, right? Before we can move forward, before we can have any real dialogue about racism, we have to understand what it is, the impacts that it has on our mental, our emotional, and our physical health, the impacts that it has with our faculty, with our teachers, with our staff. So gaining a foundation is the goal of this presentation tonight. So we're going to inform you on what it is. And a lot of you are like, oh, I already know what racism is. But we want to give a deeper, systemic point of view of what racism is in society and how it really plays out in the STEM world. And then we want to leave you with a few resources. Each time we will leave you with resources. Each time we will leave you with something to think about, because the goal is that you're able to make each of the sessions, and if not, you can see them after they're recorded and gain information. The second series will be very, very interactive. It'll be an opportunity for you all to hear experiences from faculty, staff, and students about how they've navigated situations of racism, experiences that they've had. And what I find that to be very beneficial in that space is that you have an opportunity to hear other's story, right? It adds value to who you are and affirms some things that you may have felt. It affirms, you know, understands, allows you to understand everything that's going on in their world. And it's a little bit more of an opportunity to provide space. And then the last one is on allyship. It's an opportunity for us to understand that if you're in the majority or the minority group, that there is space for you at the table, that there is opportunities for us to dialogue, that there's opportunities for us to communicate moving forward. So it is a 3-part series that we're looking for. It's going to be fast paced. So we have an hour. Of course, we're here afterwards to communicate with you, but we want to really use the time wisely and you know, disseminate as much information as we can, but then also allow you all to have a voice as well. And I see we will be checking the chat throughout as we move forward. All right.
So what to expect, right? So you can expect to learn and study concepts that challenge your worldviews and ways of naturally existing in the world. So we all have like this natural attitude of way of existing, right? It's really based on our own interpretive lens that's filtered through social, political, historical, and other ideological structures, right? So it's important to be aware of that, right? That's my own personal lens of understanding the world. And when I'm approached with information or knowledge that may be contrary to that or that contradicts that, it can kind of create some internal dissonance, right? Where it evokes strong emotions and opinions. And I'm just here to say that, hey, that's okay, right? Like that's part of this process. So I really want to normalize that and say that, hey, you know, that those things may come up for you, but don't dismiss it. Don't push it down, right? Become aware of it, right? That can be an entry point for really understanding and gaining deeper understanding of these topics and your experiences of existing. All right, so some guidelines or just some things to kind of think about, you know, as we are engaging in this conversation together, right? So strive really for intellectual humility. So basically what that means is really embodying this disposition that I may not know everything related to this topic, that I have room to grow, you know, that I'm interested in learning more, you know. It helps us to really maintain this openness posture and position when engaging in this topic, right? So really trying to seek to understand versus seeking to agree and to disagree. Because if we come from this position where I'm seeking to agree or disagree, then I'm not engaging, right? It's like, oh, I don't agree with that. I'm not going to engage, right? But if we're seeking to understand, right, then it helps us to really critique and analyze the ways in which we may be participating and engaging in these different structures. And then looking at also recognizing the difference between opinions and informed knowledge, right? So we really want to make sure that we are able to separate the two in having this conversation as well. That this knowledge that we'll be providing is based off of, you know, empirical evidence. So it's important to really be able to differentiate the two. And then also let go of any personal anecdotal evidence and look at broader societal patterns, right? So it's not to say that, you know, your personal experiences don't matter, right? We're not saying that at all, right? But we're wanting to use those personal experiences as a starting point, right? Don't end there, right? We want you to move towards thinking about patterns and how these things exist in our society, right? So moving a little bit forward and being able to critique these systems in which we all exist and participate in. And I repeat, we all exist and participate in. And then notice your own defensive reactions and attempt to use these reactions as entry points for gaining deeper understanding, right? So again, really trying to understand what I'm experiencing. You know, I'm a counselor at heart, so we're all about feelings and emotions and how that provides a pathway for understanding and also knowing. So this isn't just an intellectual exercise, right? It's an emotional component there too. And that can be a part of learning, right? And developing greater empathy and understanding for different groups of people. So don't shy away from that. And then also recognize how your identities and experiences informs your perspectives and reactions, right? So these bodies that we house, right? we have different experiences based off of these bodies that we in-house, right? So it's important to be aware of that my perspective is really based off of this perspective here, this one unique perspective, and understanding how we're approaching this conversation and trying to understand the societal patterns. So yeah. All right, so I really wanted to start with this general, there we go. All right, so I really wanted to start with this general question, or just give you all something to kind of think about a little bit more, right? To think about a little bit. So it says, generally speaking, can we all agree that human beings, regardless of one's race, age, gender, sexual orientation, ability status, and et cetera, have the potential to become, that people are not innately deficit, ill, unintelligent, or et cetera, right? So I want you all to think about that for a minute, right? Think about that. Are people just born, innately deficit or ill?
Dr. White, is just something you just want them to think about, or would you like any feedback on that one?
Yeah, I just wanted them to think about it for a minute.
Okay.
So if the answer is yes, then, right? So is it not by happenstance that white men constitute about half or more than half of the scientists and engineers employed in science and engineering occupations? Is that by chance, right? Is it not by happenstance or individual failing that people of color are some of the biggest consumers of computing and technology innovations, yet they do not own a large scale computer company, social media company, or an aerospace company, to name a few? Is it not by happenstance that people of color in STEM report countless incidents of racial microaggressions, racial stereotyping, and other forms of racialized bias in STEM? So what's really happening here? What's happening? Like, what comes to mind for you all right now when you hear this? And you can comment in the chat, or we also want to hear your voices. So tell me what comes to mind. What's happening right now? Is it just happenstance? Is it by chance that we're seeing this?
If you'd like to speak up on this, please use the raise your hand feature. I have Fiona. You can take your phone off mute.
Hi, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Absolutely, great.
Yes.
Yeah. My name is Fiona, like you said, and when I think about what you just read, I kind of, what comes to mind is history, and not necessarily what comes to mind is that, like, for some people, especially I guess in America, the access to education, the access to STEM jobs, regardless, not regardless, but depending on if you were a person of color or a woman, I feel like there was a time where it wasn't really allowed. And so a lot of people in position of power were white men. Aside from that, that's all that I thought.
No, thank you for sharing that perspective. You're really highlighting that historical aspect of racism, right? And how some groups weren't able to engage, right? And weren't afforded that type of opportunity. So yes, thank you for sharing that perspective. Anybody else want to share something?
Yes, looks like we have one more from Sopna.
Yeah, I was just gonna piggyback off of what she talked about with history. So along with history came a lot of systemic racism that was put into place, systems that were put into place to keep people behind. And then a result of that was also interpersonal racism that affects the microaggressions and the racial stereotyping that we see too.
Yes, so true. I mean, you really highlighted the systemic aspect of things, and how race was used as a way to privilege some and oppress others. So you really highlighted that aspect, as well as the interpersonal interactions of racism. So it's multi-layered, right? So yes, thank you for sharing that. It looks like we have one other.
Yep, we'll do one more, Dr. White. Shoshana, do you mind sharing your feedback?
Oh, yes, I was just going to say that it's not just race, it's gender in general. I mean, women have been historically underrepresented in science forever, more so in so-called the hard sciences, physics, chemistry, astronomy, engineering, not so much in biology and the life science area. So it's, yeah, historically the white men have kept out everybody else. So not to say that people of color have not been kept out even more so, but yeah, it was a white man's world.
Yes, for sure, for sure. That's a great point. You also highlight also the intersections of race and also being a woman, right? So although our topic is really related to racism, it's important to understand that how interlocking forms of oppression may be present in one's experience, right? So if I'm a Asian American woman in STEM, I may be experiencing racism, but also sexism, right? So yes, thank you for that perspective. So yeah, so who's the corporate? The corporate is racism, right? And you all really already highlighted what racism is already. So it's really rooted in this explicit or implicit belief that all members of a purported race possess characteristics, abilities, or qualities specific to that race, especially as to distinguish it as inferior or superior to another race or other races. So it really comes from, this is basically saying that, hey, that racial groups it's basically saying that there are real racial differences, right? That there are biological racial differences, which means that people should receive different social rewards, right? When it comes to education, when it comes to healthcare, when it comes to wealth attainment, right? And even in thinking about some of the stats that I already mentioned, right? It involves the historical, ongoing institutional power and authority leading to policies that are expressions of that belief. So that really speaks to what someone mentioned earlier about that systemic aspect and understanding how, it's an interpersonal exercise, right? So, I can remember in my own program of study and I had an interaction with a peer and they said, Dwayne, you are the smartest Black guy I've ever met. And what is the underlining message underneath that? What is the underlining message there, right? That people of color or Black people aren't as intelligent as white people. So you see how it feeds into that belief that I just mentioned, right? So understanding how it does come at this, that we do experience it at an individual level, but then thinking about the systemic aspect and how it prevents people from being able to engage as well is very important. And it creates these systems of privilege and oppression. And then, as I said earlier, when we think about intersectionality, that adds another layer to it, right? And understanding how these different systems are interconnected, right? So it really helps us to understand individual experiences. And then also thinking about racial identity development, right? Which is how we come to know ourselves as racial beings, right? So everybody is at different levels when it comes to that. So it's important to really understand these two constructs and ideas to really understand how people experience the world.
And then we'll get into, I really enjoyed the dialogue earlier because I can tell that you all have some basis of knowledge there. So that's exciting for this dialogue. But when we talk about the 4 levels of racism, because oftentimes when we look at racism, people just think it's personal, right? It's just, this man said this to me and that was racist, or it was a covert or overt way of being racist. But in reality, there are levels to racism. So we really want to make sure that you all are aware of that. And the first level is looking at it in the personal aspect. So this is your internal beliefs based off of the family that you were raised in, the environments that you were surrounded by, the beliefs within your cultural norms. And this is just individual. So these are the things that you think about when you enter a classroom as you sit down or you meet with a faculty member one-on-one. These are the things that you're thinking on internally. But when you get to interpersonal, this is where your interactions and the expression of racism between someone else. So this is where, you know, you're having a conversation with a faculty, and then you may put, you know, they may have communication with you that may seem racist, but that's based off of their personal beliefs. So it's extending from the personal level. Imagine it growing into the interpersonal, where I'm no longer just carrying those beliefs. I'm actually expressing them, you know, to someone else based off of what I believe. So it's the expression of racism to other individuals. It may be a group of people, but it's the expression outside of your internal thoughts. And then when you look at institutional, that's what we're really wanting to bring home today, talking about institutional as students, as faculty, as staff, as people that work in the STEM world. There are really discriminatory practices and policies within the organization that may block. So, you know, if you came from a rural area, you may not have had access to all of the things to be prepared to be at an R1 institution, you know, and so you come into the space and there's some type of discrimination towards you because you didn't have that access and you're a person of color, and that's another bias added onto that. And then looking at it in the structural system, this is when we're starting to look at it in policies and procedures and public matters, institutional practices, and the norms of just racial inequity. So the discrimination, and I'll show a slide shortly that really hones in on what is covert and overt, but a lot of times you can see that there's systems that are in place that are holding back people of color, that are holding back minorities in the education space, but then also within faculty.
I just noticed I was on mute. All right, yes, great point, Johniqua. And I would also like to add that when we talk about racism, right, that we no one here is responsible for it starting, right? Like we were all born into this, right? So I think that sometimes there can be just different reactions when we talk about racism. And I think that it's important to recognize that, hey, no one here living is responsible for the development of racism. Like we were born and everything here was already set up, right? So our only choice today is to figure out, hey, what to do with this, right? So yes, thank you for mentioning that, Johniqua. And so let's talk about why is this relevant to STEM, right? So these are just some basic things to kind of consider at the program level. But of course, as I said, that there are some interpersonal things that we could like talk about for days, right? And I really want to hear you all's perspective as it relates to this as well. But some things that could happen is that STEM programs may reinforce, research shows that STEM programs may reinforce oppressive systems by failing to incorporate critical or culturally responsive pedagogical methods, right? So if I'm relying on this banking concept of education as my teaching modality, so for those who may be unfamiliar with this method, it is where the educator deposits information into students with the implicit assumption that students are ignorant or will just accept anything that I say, right? And this is a colonial teaching method because it produces an unequal power dynamic, right? There's an unequal power dynamic. Like who's the knowledge holder in the room, right? So it's almost like this epistemic injustice that occurs where students, and particularly students of color, are not seen as knowledge holders and they're unable to engage, right? This approach really centers in this politically neutral or color blindness position because it doesn't engage students and who come from diverse backgrounds, right? So it's very important that we are aware of the ways in which we are teaching. You know, how are we as faculty members, right? Like what modalities are we using? And then thinking about how STEM programs may reinforce oppressive systems by subconsciously endorsing course curriculums centered on whiteness, right? So meaning that curriculums may privilege and provide social recognition to white people. So this could look like, you know, maybe all the textbooks that I'm using in my courses, they were created or the authors are all, you know, white. Maybe the theories that we are basing this knowledge upon are, you know, the theories that we're using, they're all by, white individuals, like even in thinking about the examples that I'm using in class, right? Even thinking about like discussions that we're having. Also, it filters down to like student evaluations and how we are evaluating students. What measures are we using to evaluate students, right? So it's really important that we figure out the ways in which this is embedded, in our programs, in order to make the changes needed. And it just creates this toxic work and learning environment in many ways, where students and faculty of color may feel silence, which creates some frustration and internal dissonance. Where they're unable to engage, right? Where I'm unable to be my authentic self. And when we're our authentic selves, that's when we do our best work, is when I'm able to show up as I am, that's when I'm able to do my best work. So it's really important that we are aware of these dynamics and how they play out, even in thinking about like racial microaggressions that some students may be experiencing in class, right? Maybe I may have this fear of retaliation that I can't say nothing, because there's this inherent power differential because I'm a student, right? So it's important that we really think about how these things show up in our programs and how we may be perpetuating racism within our programs. So these are just some things to kind of think about a little bit further. But I guess I'm wondering now, like how does this show up in your own individual contexts and where you are currently at? And you can raise your hand, chat. You can use the chat feature, or we'd love to hear your voice as well. So, okay, it looks like, is it Matita?
Hi, yes. So I am an incoming medical student, and I have heard many stories about patients being racist, calling medical students or residents the N-word. And the question I have is, how do you react in those situations? What do you do? And I've definitely also heard stories where the physicians or attending physicians don't really do anything or say anything to the patient when those kinds of things happen. So do you just ignore it and act like it never happened? Like, what do you do?
You wanted to answer, Jay? I'll let you go and then I'll.
I know you would. I will say this, I've had moments where I have, you kind of have to assess the moment for where it is, and there's times where I don't have time to focus on how you're reacting to me because I have a job in front of me, I have responsibilities in front of me, I have things that I'm supposed to learn. So it's a moment of, am I trying to be a change agent in this moment, or am I trying to graduate? And I know that may sound, broad as day, but there's times where, I hear the saying, you got to know when to hold it and when to fold it. If I'm at the point where I'm about to have a seat at the table, I will address it once I get on the other side, right? But in some moments, if I'm just a beginner student and this is something that I'm continuing to see, then I will begin to move and navigate through the chain of command. Because what we're starting to see in society is that those norms of being racist, those norms of being biased, those norms of saying things that are inappropriate are coming to an end. And you're starting to see it in practice where people are going to the HR, they're going to the deans, they're going to, and it's not tolerated anymore. You're seeing people protest faculty, you're seeing people protest human resources or corporate organizations, and there being eradication of change happening. So I say assess the moment. If it's timely to do it in that moment, you may feel comfortable and you may need more tools. That's what Dwayne and I are here for. And even on my side work outside of LSM, I equip students, corporate offices, different entities on how to develop those skills to communicate. Because sometimes you're not comfortable having that courageous conversation. And sometimes you just want to go on and do what you need to do to graduate. But the assessment of where you are is important.
Yes, most definitely. And just from a mental health aspect, so Dr. Williams really provided you all with some tools and understanding how to approach the actual situation. But then after you leave that situation and you're stuck with this emotional, I'm a counselor, so I have to come from this posture or position. But even, in dealing with what comes after, right? The frustration, maybe the hurt or what have you, like it's important to sit with that and to deal with that. One, being able to engage in some type of positive coping mechanism or skills. Two, being able to find your support, like who are my people here that I can trust? What are those safe spaces, right? That I can go to, even mentors, figuring out the people who can serve as a mentor, who can help you in that process and understanding how to cope and deal with that process. Because it's really important that we have these individual ways of addressing and handling situations, but it's also important that we build community bridges and being able to address these problems too, because it's just not your issue. It's like I said, it's all of our issue, right? So, yeah.
And I will say, I've had a moment when in graduate school where I had to really think about what's my position here. Is it time for me to say something? Am I going to really be heard in this moment? Because if I'm not going to be heard, or I see patterns of someone not really listening, or someone else says something and I'm seeing patterns of them not listening, I know that's not my person to communicate with, right? Then I may assess who's on the next level to communicate with and try to see about that. But always assess the moment and see where there could be, damage, or if there could be benefit, where those things can be, and assess that. And you might want to walk it through with a mentor or somebody within LSAMP that's there for you, because the beautiful thing about LSAMP is that it's the foundation to support students of color, right? And so we are your first base. We are the ones that are here for you to help navigate. And if you don't find that this whole network is so important to have and move forward. Please reach out to us moving forward. If you have, I will definitely be there as a support system to help navigate that.
Yes.
Okay, so what we're going to talk about. Sorry, Dwayne.
Oh, no, I was just going to highlight, I think that what this conversation and this dialogue that we're highlighting, it really illustrates like this added stress on top of just worrying about, trying to get an assignment completed, trying to, financial stress and all of that. Like this is an added stress due to one's minority position. So that's something that I just really wanted to highlight and really contextualize in it, because it's something that we have to be aware of as program administrators, as staff, as faculty members as well, and figuring out ways in which we can support our students and faculty members of color.
So when we look here, we're going to look at covert racism. So within racism, there's covert and there's overt, right? So these key aspects I really want to talk about, because a lot of time, and Dwayne, he gave such a good example of this earlier, where they said, "Oh, Dwayne, you're so smart for a Black man." While that may be something that someone is saying that is positive, it can be disguised as, oh, and if Dwayne says, I really am kind of offended by that, they say, there's no plausible deniability. There's oh no, I didn't mean any harm by that. I didn't mean to hurt your feelings. Did I say something that was wrong? And those are the little things that start setting you off in class. Those are the little things that just start eating away at you while you're in the faculty meeting. Those are the little things that eat away at you as you're planning and coordinating different events, right? And that impact people think that, oh, I'm just not able to do my job, I'm not able to focus. No, little things are happening to me, little microaggressions, little comments are building up to me to be irritated at work or to be irritated in the classroom. And when I would have got an A on the test or a B on the test, I got a C or a D because I felt like I couldn't be my authentic self in the room. I felt like I couldn't be my authentic self with the professor because I got covert conversation. Well, I understand you came from this type of school, so you probably didn't have those resources. So that belittles me in the moment. And when I would rise to the occasion, no matter where I come from, you put me in my place to tell me where I should be or how I should be based off of my race or my background, right? And so these are little actions, and it's based off societal privilege and access. And we'll talk about that when we get to, understanding where faculty and staff and different students come from. There's a place of privilege that they're oblivious to some aspects of lack of privilege, right? So the conversation, the dialogue is almost disrespectful at times, right? And it may be a result of unconscious bias. So I will say, sometimes we just want to fire the guns off and just tell everybody, especially in the climate that we're in, like that was racist. But that's why I always say assess the situation, because some of it may, and apply grace and mercy, because we all need a little bit of grace and mercy as we navigate this life, because unconscious and implicit biases do happen. Right? If I grew up in a rural town or a certain type of area where I had no access to minorities, I don't know how to communicate with you all the time. I don't know how to navigate through a conversation, or I don't want to say there's the elephant in the room. And I've had this with several colleagues that, I'm an open book, and I try to be as, I love having courageous conversations that make people's palms sweat and, itch. And you're just like, oh my God, I don't know what I should say. I thrive in those conversations because I grew up in Denver, Colorado, where it was very diverse, right? And so I'm able to have those conversations, but some people are not. They're not equipped. So if you're coming to say you're going to a rural R1 institution and they're not used to minorities coming there, there may or may not be comments that are said to you that you just say, did you say what I think you said? Did you mean what I think you meant? And those things, they mean no malice by it, but unconsciously it's something that they have had no access to anybody that's like you coming to their program, or so few that they just put you in one particular box as you come in. And it may be subtle, but it's still suppressing how you feel. Let's see. And then we'll go to overt racism. So looking at it this is blatant. This is in your face. Young lady said they're calling you the N-word. They're calling you other racial derogatory terms. I'm seeing a lot in the news where they're doing nooses and putting things there where they're letting you know that you're not really supposed to be there. And so this includes hate speech, right? Acknowledgement of racist attitudes and beliefs. It's rooted, and we keep saying it over and over again, in white supremacy. This idea of this is right and this is how it's going to be, this is how it's always been, and the ideology of, this is how we have to maintain the status quo. That this level is the right level, that this is the way it's always supposed to be. And when they communicate with you, if you come from any other standpoint, it turns into you're wrong and you're against the agenda, you're against what's moving forward, and you're not as comfortable. And then it's blatant, and it's negative attitudes that are directed to non-white groups. And I know a lot of people, and when Dwayne said this in the beginning, this may trigger some people when they hear that, right? Because this is not one of those, flowers we're walking in the park conversations. This is one of those, we're really having the honest conversation that we just tuck away and we just tell students to go on to graduate school, but we send them to institutions where they're not prepared for them to be at. So we want to be honest with you all and talk about how those negative attitudes, those negative ideas, those negative actions are directed to non-white groups. And it can participate. It's not monolithic. It's not one thing. It's not solely just one idea. It can happen with individuals. It can happen within groups. It can happen within institutions across society. We talked about those 4 levels of racism, right? And overt racism is actions are really easily, you can see them versus overt, but they may start as a covert. They may start as small little conversations, and then one day it's an overt racism comment or overt racist action that is taking place. And so I put this diagram here to really go over, just a visual understanding of it. Where you see overt, those are hate crimes. Those are a way of lynching, anti, immigration, blackface, Ku Klux Klan. All of those things are in the overt category. And then when you move further down, color blindness. I was in a session with one of the faculty, and I won't mention the institution, but they said, and they lead with this, and this is something that I always follow up with anyone who's presenting at any point. I don't see color. Color blindness, you know, we're all human beings, we're all represented here. And that happens a lot in STEM, where you don't want to necessarily deal with racial backgrounds, but if you do not see color, then you do not see me. When you see, when in a space where you say, I do not see color, you do not see me. I am a person of color. I'm a woman of color in this space. I am someone that you have to acknowledge, you know, in this space to move forward, okay? And so those are the white supremacy, denying institutional racism. Those are all aspects of covert racism. And we can't move forward in any of these part 2, part 3 until we really understand that. Okay, so make sure you screenshot this, or I'm sure you'll see it. Make sure you have this, because you will know, is this a covert? And even this helps your communication for the young lady that said, how do I address this? Learning these terminologies, and so that it's not just coming from the heart, because we're a science-based industry. We numbers matter, data matters. But when I come with you with feelings, sometimes that's like, hey, we don't have time for that. We can't talk about it. But in this space, it is so imperative that we use the language that's ahead of us to navigate. And I will show you this diagram here as well, because I don't want to leave anything untouched tonight. I want to really, you know, come forth with this. So this is tokenism, solo status, stereotype threat. And this is based off of the stigma of some faculty, you know, hidden biases between faculty, staff, students, coordinators, everybody. There may be some aspect of bias. And a lot of times what happens is, especially in very competitive institutions, I was fortunate to have 4 students this year go off to very high distinguished R1 institutions. But when I tell you the conversation I know that I'm going to have with those students that are going from a very diverse Columbus, Georgia, to a very white rural areas for the top elite schools within biology and chemistry, I've had to have those courageous conversations, because the professors are not always equipped with being prepared with, or being equipped to understand that students may not, any language or English may not be their first language. They may not have come from affluent backgrounds that had access to tutoring or working schedules that blend with academics. They may totally just know, I have to work to provide for my family and keep moving, and then I also have to go to school. So some faculty, some coordinators, some, you know, we just want to work with those students that are straight laced, right? That are, they come in, they know their stuff, they know their content. They don't have to take any remedial classes. They don't have to do any of those things. It's just easy, and we can move forward. They can help push my research agenda items forward, right? Which we know that that's some of the pieces of what they want to do. But instead of trying to be inclusive, and they say, we're only going to take maybe 1 or 2 minorities because we think that they're not prepared or equipped to handle the academic rigor that we have. So we rather just bring in people that look like us, that talk like us, and it really impacts how students feel. It really impacts how students perform in a classroom, because when they look around the classroom, no one is like them. And so there's an isolation, there's a fear of not being accepted, there's a fear of not being understood, there's a fear that if I say something, it's not gonna be, you know, received well. And so I want to, and I see one question in the chat. I want to hit this here because I know we only have about 15 minutes left. And so the impacts of this within higher education is you physically feel unsafe. When you see a noose in your room, or you see the N-word spray painted somewhere, or you see that there's immigration, that they have ideas, or you go to your faculty's social media and you see that they talk about they hate immigrants and they don't want immigration reform. Those are things that make you feel unsafe in an environment. You don't see people like you, and there's some discrimination against those. I had several students talk about being, especially my Black males, that they didn't feel comfortable when police would interact with them, and how could we navigate that? These are STEM students scared to go to the library in the evening because the police officers are there. Or don't feel comfortable being themselves because they don't necessarily speak the language of the field just yet. That's why LSAMP is so important. We teach you how to communicate within the field, but before you get there, some of us may not know it, right? Some of us may not have had that access. And so because of that, you don't feel comfortable talking to the professor after class. You don't feel comfortable talking to your other peers who you feel, and you may find out that they don't know as much as you, but you feel like they know more than you because you just have a deficit model moving forward. And you don't feel valued by the institution, because if they valued you, they put students that look like you in the classrooms, right? So you start to begin to feel that, or even the faculty, you know, you're the only faculty, you're the only person that's doing this type of work for students of color, and you feel all of these things because you're the only person on that campus. You're worn out. I've been in that role where you're worn out because you're the person of color that all the students of color are coming to, and Lord forbid, if I don't reach out to that other student of color, what will they miss? What will they not have access to? What will they not be able to do because I wasn't there to support them? That burden of feeling, you know, of being a double minority, of being the person that's the only person in the faculty or staff or coordinator's position there, and then also being the only minority and making sure that you have to be there as a support system. And then lastly, not feeling a part of the campus community. Now I see a Q&A. I'm not able to pull it up here. Dwayne, are you able to see the Q question?
I can read that for you.
Okay.
Yep. It says, I am considering going to medical school down south come 2023 to be both closer to family and is priced nicely. However, I have some concern. Although racism exists everywhere, I am somewhat nervous as I am a Black man heading towards a place rooted in racist and afraid I won't get the resources I need to succeed. Do you guys have any advice on this? So I'm assuming, this is a young man who was born in the North and is basically going south for their education.
Well, Evan, I will say, you know, first of all, very good for putting this question, you know, in the chat. I think it's repeating. So I think that it's very good that you asked that question. I think any time before you go anywhere that you must research where you're going. And I tell this to every student, and it's a requirement of the students of mine that are graduating, going anywhere. I call them my babies, but you know, that I don't want you to go anywhere where you have not interviewed the faculty, where you have not interviewed the students there, where you have not interviewed, you know, just seen the surroundings. If you're a person of faith, checked out the ministries there. If you're a person that loves sports, and you know, what are the leisure things that you can do? Because I know that we're going to talk about balance over the summer, of balancing academics and your personal, but it's important to figure out where your tribe is, because sometimes you may not be able to, if it's a top elite institution, you may not have the tribe on the campus. You may not have the tribe, you know, within your classmates or the faculty, but you have it outside of the community. So you can navigate being on the collegiate level there because you have the outside support, you know. But then, you know, I always say, build your team. Your team is not just in the four walls of the classroom. Your team is not just the students that are surrounding you in a cohort. Your team is the community that you're able to find there. So before you make any moves, we'll come on down south, we'll welcome you. But make sure that you're looking up resources to support you along the way.
Yes, yes to everything Dr. Williams just said, because that's my experience. You know, when I was considering going to school down south, I was looking at researching, you know, program faculty members, right? Interviewing them, also looking at their research interests, right? So is diversity somewhere listed in your research interests or what have you, right? Really trying to see if there are program statements related to diversity, and also looking outside of the program and looking at the university level, right? So are there any types of organizations that I could be a part of on campus, right? So I'm a student at Auburn University in their doctoral program, and I created this group for Black males to have a space to actualize their agency, right? Because you know, we're on campus, right? There are PhD students on campus, but you know, there are not many of us, right? So I created this group on campus, and we have our space that we cultivate, and we come together every third Thursday of the month, and that's my support system. Those are the individuals that I lean on, right? But I definitely agree that it's important to find your community, find your people, find your tribe, right? And then also researching the program. All medical schools aren't created equal, right? So it's important that you engage in those types of actions. So we hope that that helps in some ways, Evan. Okay. All right. So
Okay, when you're
can you hear me?
yes.
Okay. Okay. All right. So I see we have like about 7 minutes left. So I'm going to kind of go through this a little quickly because I want to save time just to see if anyone has an additional question. Um, so we really want to look at the mental health impacts of racism as well. So we know that indirect or direct experiences of racism in STEM programs may lead to the development of race-related stress or trauma, you know, and some of those indirect experiences can be something as seeing, you know, like when individuals saw the videos of George Floyd that was circulating online, right? Like those are some of those indirect experiences. I can remember last summer in my program and how students of color, they had different visceral types of reactions, right? In class, you know, and we had to sit down and create some spaces for us to kind of come together as a program to figure out, hey, like, what are we going to do with this? Like, how can we contribute to this conversation and to really dismantle these things from within? So it's really important for us to understand those aspects and how students may be impacted, right? So there can be emotional, psychological, and physical disturbances. So maybe, you know, there may be some hypervigilance that I may be experiencing, right? Which makes me feel a little bit more anxious in coming into the classroom and engaging with other folks, right? Maybe I may be experiencing some depressive symptoms, right? Where I can't get out of bed. I don't want to do my homework, right? So it's important to understand how this is an added stressor again on top of the everyday stress that people experience, and it's the culmination that really makes this come about, right? So the culmination of experiencing everyday racism in programs, maybe outside of programs, right? In everyday society, you know, going to the clinic on campus, and maybe I had some type of interaction there, right? So that's an important aspect to also remember, and it really strikes at the core of one's selfhood, right? So this is something that we had no control over, right? It's not like we're given a checklist saying, hey, all right, so, you know, this is the body that you will hold, you know, or what have you. We're not given that, right? So it really strikes at one's core sense of self. So it's really important for us to be aware of these dynamics and how they show up for students, and figuring out ways in which we can support students as well. So. All right, so in conclusion, we want to leave you all with this. So in order to see ourselves as a part of the solution, we need to be able to see ourselves as part of the problem. So one's privilege is always tied to another's oppression. So I know that as a Black queer man, like I have some male privilege in there, right? So I understand that privilege in itself is tied to the oppression of another. So it's important for us to really see ourselves, right? See the fullness of ourselves and understand how we operate and exist in the world in order to dismantle these systems that are at play. And I think a lot of times this culture of niceness, which refers to the organizational norm that talking about race, white privilege, and equity is not nice because it makes people feel uncomfortable, right? But this can result in us colluding in silence, all right? So just being silent on these issues and not having these types of conversation and dialogue. And it's important to note that, you know, these terms like racism, sexism, ableism, and all the other systems of oppressions, like these aren't pejorative terms, right? These aren't slurs or anything of that nature, right? Like these are descriptives. So it's important for us to understand that, and so that we're not internalizing those different messages, right? So in order for us to move forward, it's important for us, again, to see ourselves as a part of the problem in order to work towards a solution, and really trying to figure out, like, how can we think the unthinkable? How can we break the silence and move forward? So that's what we really want to motivate you all to do today.
And I also want to add to this, and I love how Dwayne put this in there, that it refers to niceness. And some people think that it's not appropriate, but I also commission you to think about being a change agent. If I never say anything, nothing will ever change. If I allow the professor to discriminate against me and only use people that are white faculty or have white resources, or only have white people come to speak to me, I will never know what it's like to see a person of color in that field. So even as a coordinator, it's my duty for me to make sure that I invite people of color to speak, that I am providing reading materials and research opportunities for students to see themselves in that. That if I have researchers, I have nothing but students that are full brains, and I know that I'm talking to some students that are brains. When you're doing research, are you considering minority populations? Or are you continuing to perpetuate the same type of things that we're seeing in society day after day? If you are saying it, check yourself. Because when I leave this world, I don't want to be the only one that sat at the table. I don't want to be the only one that had the access and the privilege. I want my actions to then reach back to somebody else and say, come on, let me help you, come on. And I'm not giving it to you. I think, Brian brought up a good point where earlier today we were just talking, where I'm not asking you to give it to me, I've earned it. And because I've earned the seat at the table, I want to help others to have a seat at the table, so that the conversation is diverse, so that the research is diverse, so that we're not questioning is STEM. When we look at the vaccines and all the things that are going on, we're not questioning science because we don't see that many people that look like us there, right? We are a part of the solution. We are a part of navigating STEM as minorities and pulling other minorities along.
All right, so just some things to kind of think about a little bit further. I see we got like a minute left, but until we meet again, maybe engage in some reflexivity, right? So just really thinking about my own experiences, right? So whether I am the target of racism or I have maybe engaged and perpetuated it in some ways, right? So really trying to sit back and understand myself, my own automatic assumptions, my beliefs, my reactions, and how they impact, my understanding of the world and understanding of others. I think that engaging in critical reflexivity is the first step in being able to dismantle these systems. So I have to figure out the ways in which I engage in it, right? In order to dismantle it, right? And also really trying to be aware of potential problem areas and learn to recognize when they arise, right? So, like don't shy away from it. As I said in the beginning, right? Like don't shy away from those different emotions and things like that. We all have been born into this world with these systems that were already here, right? So it's important for us to continuously engage in this reflexive process in order to dismantle it, because we're constantly approached with it, in media, in school systems, we're always surrounded by it, right? So in order to dismantle it, it's a constant orientation, right? It's not like I wake up one morning and I'm fully competent, and I know everything as it relates to know about this topic. I'm still learning, I'm still trying to dismantle these things from within, right? And one of the first steps in doing and being able to do that is to engage in some critical reflexivity. So, yeah.
And then lastly, I know we're short and I want to leave the last couple seconds for questions, or however much time we're willing to stay a few minutes over. Just you screenshot this here or come back and watch it. Learning for justice, and this is just teaching tolerance, but tolerance and they talk about tolerance within this because we hear teaching tolerance a lot, but it talks about in the format of social justice, and then creating courageous conversations. I'll send a link of all of these resources to Deb so that she can send this out to everybody. And then Project Implicit, where you're looking at different biases within society today. And it's a part of Harvard's IAT, their assessment of bias. And then the holler back trainings is just a really cool way for you to understand bystander intervention for those that may not identify as a minority. What do I do in the space? How do I become an ally? So those are some things that you'll be able to navigate, and I'll send that out. But I just wanted to, if there was any questions, please, I get our gallery view on. I'm excited to hear from anybody that has a question for Dr. White or I.
All right, if you'd like to ask a question, please use the raise your hand feature and I will have you take your phone off mute. First come, first serve. I know you guys
You
got
must
some
have nailed it,
questions.
Dr. White. They look.
We had to.
We had to
No,
nail
you
it.
guys
They
did
had
a
to,
great job.
you know.
You get the students even put in the chat box that you did a great job tonight. So I'd like to open this up. We have our wonderful speakers available to answer a few questions. We will have 2 more sessions on this topic, but we would love to hear your questions tonight on this discussion that we had tonight, which is very eye-opening, I think very honest, but done in a very tasteful way. So great job. Fiona, your feedback, please.
Hi, so I have a question, and my question to both of you guys is, in your past or like at any time in your life, has there been a time you guys were speaking about like how if you're not your authentic self, you can't do your best or you can't be your best. Has there been a time where you felt like you had to assimilate to a certain type of I don't know, behavior or expression? And I guess how did you go about it? Like, did you just, oh, I guess I'll just assimilate and I'll act this way? Or did you kind of try to be your authentic self? Or I guess, yeah, did you guys ever have any of those type of experiences and how you dealt with that?
So yeah, I know me personally, yes, I continuously deal with it. Even today, when me and Dr. Williams we were speaking, and I was like, oh, I have to, I'm intellectualizing everything. Like, why am I doing that? Even when presenting and things like that, right? I'm feeling like I have to ascribe or to assimilate in some type of way or speak, in this way or talking, in this way. So I think that it's something that it's a continuous process. It's a developmental process that I consistently have to try to dismantle from within. It's a process that I seek support in, so I have mentors that I talk to about trying to figure out ways in being able to be my authentic self. And it's a daily process. It doesn't happen, overnight, So I think that's something to be mindful of.
And Fiona, I'll say this, I think it's trial and error. I think that there's times where again, I'm from Colorado. I went to an HBCU for undergrad. And so my first language in the classroom was a lot of slang. I'm just gonna be honest, keep it 100. I'm gonna do all those things. I came into that space doing, right? And one of my faculty pulled me to the side and said, I need you to speak the content of where you're going. My undergrad was in social work. I need you to speak to the content of what you're doing, right? So that it's not hard. So when you present, you're not trying to fumble, you're not fumbling over words. And so what I found myself doing is because I can't stand, not a fan of sellouts, what I consider to be a sellout. I don't want to be one way here and another way somewhere else. That's just not me, right? But what I did was I learned the language for where I was, right? And then from there, I learned, where do I insert myself in? And sometimes it was trial and error. Sometimes it was me trying to speak so much like, what I was, what was right to do, or sometimes it was me trying to just be honest and authentic. And I had to feel what that felt like in both of those spaces and find my comfort zone in that. And that's the beauty of being a college student. That's the beauty of being a forever learner, that I give myself the grace to be me. I give myself the grace to try different things out and try to figure out where it best fits me. So there is no wrong way of doing that. Yes, have I ever assimilated to be in a group? Yeah, absolutely. Did I like how that felt? No, right? But I had to feel that. I had to try it and feel it to know that. And so if you ever find yourself in that situation, it's nothing wrong in that, but where is your true identity? Because long after you leave that doctoral program, long after you leave that undergraduate program, you have to live with you. And where is the happy medium there? I hope that helped.
Yes, it did. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Awesome. Let's do one more question or one more bit of feedback. Use the raise your hand feature, and would love to have you come off mute. And I thank you guys so much for your openness and your participation tonight. Any last takers before we get off after our first session? Going once, going twice. All
Hey,
right.
Brian, I have one quick question. Was there anything that anybody took away that they will use moving forward? I guess I have a question for the participants. Was there anything that you heard tonight that you will really take moving forward as you navigate your STEM journey?
I found something that I could take on.
Okay, awesome.
Like you were saying about research, that really did speak to me a lot, because that was going to be the plan, since I do plan on going to North Carolina a few times in the summer, because it's my grandma's 81st birthday soon.
Oh, awesome.
And we're having a family get together because we haven't seen her in 2 years because of the pandemic, and she lives in Barbados. So we're all meeting in North Carolina for a few weeks in the summer. So I'm using some of that time to see some of the medical schools down south. But the idea of research really helps break it down, because when you were talking about community, I will have the community in my family. And if I do live in Mooresville or Charlotte, there's plenty of people that look like me. So I won't feel as alone. It may not be like Milwaukee, but it'll help me feel like there's a sense of community. But my main thing is more concern on, like, if I go on campus, will I be too afraid to speak out, or will I be able to have a mentor and someone in the field? But I think, again, it'll be up to me to scope it out. Because when I talked first, my mom was actually for me going down south to learn medical school. But my dad, who also lives in Barbados, is like, I under no circumstances do I want you down south. Which I understand where he's getting from, and I don't think it's all like that. But I do understand what it's like to be wary. So, you know. But
well, I thank you for sharing that. And if you do go to North Carolina, you let me know, because we there to support you.
Oh, okay. I couldn't hear what you said before. It kind of went out.
Uh-oh. I was saying, can you hear me now? Is it clear?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Okay, so I'm just saying, if you do go to North Carolina, let me know. I went to undergrad there, and I have quite a few friends and resources there. We have 2 scholars that are going to North Carolina as well. One that's in South Carolina and one that's in North Carolina. So definitely, if you need a network, let us know.
That'd be much appreciated. Thank you.
Yes, I see one more hand.
Yep. I think there was one more there.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, actually, the last thing that you said, Dr. Williams, about assimilating, or like, for me, like code switching, because I grew up on the Black side of town. I went to a Black high school, so I never really had to change my voice in any type of way until I came to UWM, the school, UWM, and navigating like places that I felt like I needed to code switch and places that I didn't, and also trying to navigate even like automatically code switching when I wasn't trying to, and like how that felt, because and then I just feel so weird after, and like, so hearing from somebody else that you also experienced that is really validating, and like, yeah. And also I want to say to Evan, I don't know if this is like helpful or not, but like Milwaukee is already the worst place to be Black in the United States. So I mean, if you're doing okay here, I think you'll be okay. But yeah, okay, I'm done.
But I will say that's excellent. That's excellent that you said that, because it's a journey and you have to be fair to yourself as you navigate. So good job for starting to do that.
and we'll end with Fiona.
Okay. Sorry for if I was speaking too much. Lastly, with your question or whatnot of what we took away, I think there was a part earlier in your guys's presentation where you spoke about how in academia there's like a power. There can sometimes be a power. What do you call it? A power structure between like teacher to student, and I think like hearing that and kind of just thinking about how certain teaching structures kind of can make a student feel like they don't have anything to offer, or they're just there to just soak up whatever. It kind of made me reflect on how like for the past couple of years, and like especially like during high school or whatnot, how I've tried to with any class that I'm taking, always ask questions and never like depend solely like on a teacher or on a teacher's curriculum. So yeah, I encourage everyone to always ask questions when they can, and to not be afraid to do so.
I think that's powerful that you mentioned that, because I think it's one of those things where, you know, when students are afraid to speak to faculty or staff or to coordinators, we limit their ability to grow. We limit their ability to learn how to communicate with students of color effectively. So when you are in that space, we not only want you to advocate for yourself, but communicate with them so they can get to know who you are. And again, that's another way of paying it forward so that they have abilities and tools and skills to navigate and speak with students of color.
Yeah, like you're not beholden to these systems, right? Like you can transcend them, you know, you can advocate for yourself within it. Like we can resist them, right? And I think that that's a form of resistance, and being able to ask those questions and being able to advocate for yourself. Like you do have some agency, right? I think that's powerful in itself, and understanding that I can speak up and speak out during class. So
All right. Well, thank you guys so much for your participation. Before we do our closing words from our guest tonight, I do want to do a little homework for what we have coming up here, guys. So imposter syndrome is our next session on June 2nd at 6 p.m. Eastern. We have some wonderful LSAMP alumni that'll be supporting us. So we do look forward to your participation next week. Just wanted to highlight real quickly the remaining sessions for the summer. As you can see, we're tackling some really challenging conversations, and we're really hoping that we're going to leave a great impact with you guys over the summer. I do encourage you to invite a friend and challenge them to come join the dialogues here. We're going to be here every week throughout the summer, just like we were last year, and I really hope that this is bringing value to you. But also will challenge you, not only for you to show up, but I challenge you to bring someone else with you so they can enjoy the learning as well. And with that being said, I actually like to turn it back over to you, Dr. Williams and White, and let you do kind of the send off to the group tonight.
Well, I want to say, thank you so much for having us. And thank each of you for taking your time and being here. I see that the majority of participants are still here. This is a topic that will never go away. This is a topic that will be with us moving forward. And I think that as we navigate this process, we have to lead with the saying, be the change you want to see, right? We have to lead with the agency of understanding that it's bigger than you and I, and that in this space, communication is key. So, I welcome you to continue to think about it. I encourage you to look at diversity issues or topics in the STEM world, because they don't just, they're not just social justice actions. They can be in the medical field. They can be within engineering. They can be within mathematics. All of the aspects of STEM, they are represented within that arena. And so I challenge you to do to step out and to advocate for those that may look like you, talk like you, come from the same environments of you.
Yeah, I couldn't have said it any better. Yeah, like I think that we all have this common goal in wanting access to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Like it goes down to that basic type of principle that we all, we all want. So just making sure that we are going out and we are doing the work to see the change that we're wanting to see. So as Johniqua, Dr. Williams said, be the change that you want to see. Keep moving forward, keep prospering, and you got this.
Thank you all.
Right, thank you, and do be on the lookout. There may be a survey that comes out. Please do participate in that as we try to get better information from you to better ourselves.